Martine Savard, fingerprinting air and water pollutant in the oil and sand region.
Troisième diapo aussi.
Troisième diapo.
Merci Eric. J'aimerais d'abord commencer par souligner l'importante contribution de tous mes collaborateurs dans cette large équipe qui a été un effort soutenu là, pendant 5 ans. Une belle cohésion dans l'équipe. Suivante. L'équipe that have as a big objectives to develop new indicators and understand the processes that control the distribution of contaminants around the oil sands region, specifically in the lower Athabasca open mining OS region. And we had 4 teams of research under that, one under waterborne metals, waterborne naphthenic acids, airborne PAHs, and N species affecting the nitrogen forest and cycle. So, yeah, next please. I'm going to go through each of them very quickly today. Starting with the waterborne contamination, the metals, Paul Gammon and his team has been proposing this first complete or detailed reactive transport model that allows to follow the OSPW, the oil sands processed water, and follow it through the buried channel that is entered through the groundwater system. The tailings pond is on the upper left. And there is a part of that system where fresh water is infiltrating, is recharging the aquifer. So with the new inorganic fingerprinters that they have been using, they can follow the evolution of the OSPW and show that there is a very important variation along the flow, along the yellow line, bringing water to the Muskeg River that is almost pristine. Because a lot of natural attenuation is taking place along that yellow flow path. So, what is the natural attenuation? 2 things. First, you have the recharge by fresh water at the north that dilute eventually or allows diffusion of the metals into that system. But also, next slide, you have the natural attenuation by sorption of metal on various organic complexes. Fulvic acid, humic acids that have very different distribution in groundwaters and surface water. So the distribution of these organics that will complexify with rare earths, for instance, or copper, will control the distribution of metals in the groundwater. And actually, what is interesting about this mechanism of organic matter sorption is that it can probably apply to various environments in the boreal forest. So it could be applied somewhere else and find the same type of interpretation, find that it's really useful elsewhere. So these are the results that Jason had produced for Paul in terms of distribution of fulvic and humic acid. If we go now to the next slide, another example of waterborne contamination, but this time naphthenic acids or acid extractable organics that Jason has been working on with his colleagues for the last few years. What you can see on the lower left panel is that several or different sources of AEOs can be characterized by sulfur isotopes and carbon isotopes. Sulfur is the new indicator on that slide, really, because for the last few years we've been discussing the carbon isotopes as fingerprints. So you can see on the lower left the organic matter in the water of the Muskeg River, McMurray Formation on the upper right with AEOs in the groundwater. These are 2 natural type of sources. The OSPW is the really anthropogenic type of AEOs in the system. So what you can see, the distribution of 2 sets of samples taken along 2 different tailings ponds are shown here. And using the Bayesian mixing model that Jason has shown on the lower right, you can see that at site 2, samples A and B can have concentration of OSPW as high as 75%, whereas the other samples in general in the 2 regions can have variation between 1, 0, or 25%. So a good example of apportionment of source of AEOs in the context of groundwater in the oil sands region. Next slide. still working with airborne contamination, this time on airborne with contamination PAHs. PAHs that come with snow that cover the iced lakes in the area there. And working with the PAHs, the radiocarbon, stable carbon isotopes, the upper graph is for radiocarbon, lower graph for stable isotopes. And Jason has characterized different end members, including the forest fires that produce a lot of natural PAHs. And on the two graphs, what you can see is basically a mixture between this natural end member and the pet coke, for instance, on the lower left for stable carbon, showing what is the anthropogenic type of end member. So it's another example of fingerprinting the various sources of PAHs in the oil sands area. Going to the next one. Air contamination by end species emitted by the mining operations. We had a lot of work to do in order to be able to evaluate if the delta N15 values in tree-ring series could be used as an indicator, as an archival system for having a retrospective look on the change in the boreal forest end cycle. And in order to do that, we had to evaluate what were the signals in the air components. We did that, we published that, and we see that it's limited in terms of capacity to fingerprint these emissions by delta N15 values. Later on, what we wanted to do is characterize the various compartments in the forest in order to find out how the anthropogenic emissions impact the nitrogen cycle in forest. And in collaboration with our friends from the Canadian Forest Services, we did a lot of work on soil end transformation, evaluating the rate of transformation of the end species in the soils, and characterizing the DNA sequencing for understanding if the microbial community could actually have been modified by the incoming nitrogen from anthropogenic activities. So in the integration of data that we are doing, I don't have time to go through all the results, but if you go from the roots, the soils to the roots to the stem and the tree rings, and you're trying to see what controls their signal, we see that pH controls the rate of transformation of nitrogen. So you'll have a delta N15 values in the trees that will be higher if you have an acidic soil. And this is controlled by the DNA results that you have on the lower right, where you're seeing a difference in abundance and diversity of fungi communities that will control actually the way nitrogen is fractionated before it's transferred to the trees. So in other words, at the end, we have two different types of answer in terms of delta N15 series after the onset of operations. We have a rising signal, lowering signal, and in the two cases, what is responsible for that change is really the incoming nitrogen from the mining operations that are changing or enhancing the controls that are already present in the soil. So regardless of the signal of what's falling around the trees, there will be an impact, and delta N15 values can indeed express what is a change in the nitrogen cycle of the boreal forest. This has a lot of implications for that consideration elsewhere as well. Thank you.
Spot on again.